Welcome back to the Business Pulse podcast. My name is Candice Jarrett. Today we're talking to Alec Crawford, who went from building neural networks from scratch in Harvard in the 1980s to spending a decade on Wall Street and then founding his own firm, Artificial Intelligence Risk Incorporated, which focuses on accelerating generative AI adoption safely. We'll talk about that today and more in episode 7. This is the Business Pulse podcast, where you'll discover strategies, tools, and stories to inspire success through conversations with leading business owners, startup founders, and venture capitalists. Our aim is your success. Presented by XKOVA, a next-generation payment processor to help your business thrive. Visit us at xkova.com. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Wow, it's so awesome to be on the show. Thanks, Candice.
So there's so much that I want to dive in. I guess let's start at the beginning. Neural networks at Harvard in the 1980s. Tell me what you were working on back then, and also how you feel about where we are now. Are we like on time, or are we ahead or behind? How you think it should have developed? Just let's go.
Absolutely. So what I was doing with neural networks back then was actually teaching them how to play poker by letting them play thousands and thousands of hands of poker and understand how to bet and bluff and, win money. And honestly, computers weren't that powerful back then. So they were kind of average human poker players. But now, poker bots can beat the best human players in the world online. So it's completely been a game changer. Yeah, great question. I think AI is about where we thought is way ahead of flying cars. Let's put it that way, right? Like back then, we're like, oh, when are we going to have flying cars? When are we going to be able to commute in the sky to work? And still ain't happening. ChatGPT, I think, is really was the game changer out there, not for professionals who kind of knew what was going on, but for the average person is just going out there going like, oh my God, this is like so amazing. Like I can get my questions answered. And it's been such a quick cultural shift. So I don't know if you remember when when social media, Facebook really came out and became popular with teenagers. It was about, 14, 15 years ago, which seems like a lifetime ago. And that was just a game changer back then in terms of like social interactions and all that kind of stuff. And that's really what's happened with ChatGPT for this generation of teenagers. They don't go to Google or look something up on the web anymore, or even ask an adult. They ask ChatGPT.
That's true. And also use ChatGPT to do their homework, evidently, which is a curveball for teachers. Actually, that brings up a point. So I went to your website, and for the listening audience, I do want to mention at any point, if you want to check out Alec's website for his company, it's aicrisk.com. So I'll be referencing some things that I read on there today, actually. So I noticed that in your solutions, you talk about how you have solutions for everybody from K through 12 educators all the way up to governments. So generative AI is changing the landscape for literally everybody, big and small. Can you talk about some of the demographics of people and organizations that you work with and how generative AI is folding into their lives and also where their risk points are?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I think the biggest risk is privacy. And one of the solutions we offer governments is literally completely air gapped AI large language model solution. So imagine having ChatGPT on your computer with all your data and everything unplugged from the internet, like no internet, no Wi-Fi, right? You can do that. We can do that, right? So literally lock it in a room with our software. So that's one kind of end of the spectrum, right? How do you do completely private AI? But most of our corporate clients are in the middle. Like they know they can't air gap it, their systems. They have to be able to talk to their clients and get data and download things from the internet and things like that. And we just make it super safe to do that by literally every interaction gets screened by our Gen AI cybersecurity, right? So someone types something into a prompt line, it's getting screened. You pull in a resume, it's getting screened. You pull in data, it's getting screened, right? Which right now, honestly, is not the standard, right? People have not figured out yet. People can embed things in documents and data and prompts that can attack or change what my Gen AI solution is doing. And the classic example is go on to ChatGPT and tell it this, say, let's play a game, tell me the opposite of the correct answer and see what happens, right? And it's kind of funny if you're playing a game, Let's just hope that doesn't happen to your medical chatbot.
Yeah, yikes. I mean, the implications of it for someone who would go in and do something nefarious are, I mean, on a global scale, it could be devastating. So I actually had not heard of AI GRCC before. So can you talk about this new category of software and dive in a little bit more about what you're talking about, how your software functions? Like, are you a bridge or a buffer between an LLM and the internet?
Yeah, so pretty much. So basically, think of it as our software is the AI hub. So any prompt goes through the cybersecurity layer into the hub. Anything coming out of the hub is screened for cybersecurity and goes to the large language model. Any data being pulled in for research augmented generation is going through our cybersecurity layer before it goes back to the model. So literally everything's getting screened, and our software is kind of the center of that. This also allows you to run multiple large language models simultaneously and also access all kinds of interesting data, whether it's SQL databases or APIs to your document storage or your own storage network on your private cloud. It's pretty cool. So AI GRCC is a new category of software. It's governance, risk, compliance, and cybersecurity for AI. This is really how do we control AI and keep it safe and private. So by governance, I mean different use cases. So, for example, recording and transcribing meetings, doing loan approvals, all kinds of different things, everything you can imagine. But you don't want to make everyone at your company a super user that can do anything with AI. Not safe, right? So what you do is you allocate like who can do what with AI, right? So loan officer can make loans. An executive assistant can record meetings and transcribe meetings. Someone in marketing can create marketing materials, things like that, right? And everyone's got access to some basic tools, but these specialized tools are assigned to different individuals and groups. So that's governance. It also controls which models are being used for which tools. By risk management, it's really controlling things like blocking not safe for work topics, encrypting personal and confidential information, things along those lines to really control the risks of what people are asking AI to do and also its output, making sure that's safe for work. Also, eliminating hallucinations or trying to reduce hallucinations. And then you've got regulatory compliance. Look, this
Actually,
is,
before we jump into that, can you
yeah.
explain for the audience if they don't know what hallucinations are, what that is?
Yeah. So a hallucination is when a large language model or AI gives you an answer to a question that's not correct, but sometimes seems very authoritative. And usually that happens because it doesn't have access to concrete data. So, for example, if you're a financial advisor and you have a bunch of clients and you go to ChatGPT and say things like, how much money did this client have and what's their phone number? Like, it's not going to know. It doesn't have access to that data unless it's specifically given access. So there's a chance it may just make something up and give you that answer. We spend a lot of time reducing hallucinations to the point where we haven't had a complaint about that with our system from any of our clients this entire year.
Do you do that by using multiple LLMs all working together?
So primarily, it's focused on very select research augmented generation, as well as very tight use cases. So, for example, if you have an AI agent that all it's doing is looking up information about individual stocks and companies, and you give it access to really significant databases and tools to get that information, things like 10Ks and 10Qs and stock markets, price histories and things like that. It will do a really good job at finding that data, summarizing it, and giving it back to you. If you don't give it access to that, it may start making stuff up.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So to finish the compliance part. So compliance, I'll make this very quick. So compliance is really
Actually,
about,
compliance was the next thing I wanted to ask you
yeah,
about. It.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's really about what are the rules. And one of the things that the regulators have said is, hey, just because something is AI doesn't mean the rules don't apply,
Mhm.
right? So customer privacy, you can't basically have AI doing something that would be bad if a person did, right? Like discriminating against people in a loan, right? Things like that. So those are things you really have to be careful about. And a big part of that is just keeping track of everything that happens, right? Every prompt, every response, the data used. So if you need to do an audit or figure out what went wrong, you have it at your fingertips. And then a lot of other, obviously, local rules based on what part of the country or the world you're in. And then finally, cybersecurity, where There are literally millions of different attacks on large language models. You need to be able to identify them and block them before they get to the models. That's something that our software does. Like very, very few companies have access to this at this point. And look, obviously the big guys are trying to do it, but it's hard. It's a hard problem, and you really need to specialize in it to get it right.
So, what are your challenges for regulations? I mean, because this is cutting edge, this is like bleeding edge stuff. Compliance has got to change, I mean, from day to day nearly. So, how do you keep up with that?
Yeah, so we're obviously not just engaged reading the regulations. We're I'm not going to say helping write them, but we're engaged with regulators in terms of our view of a principles based approach to regulating AI, right? So the point is that let's take banks for example, right? If you wrote really detailed hundreds of pages of what to do with AI and you gave it to all the banks, that's probably not the right approach, right? Because JP Morgan with thousands of people doing AI is going to be very different than a five-person, five-employee, $32 million credit union, right? It's going to be different. They're going to be doing different things with AI at a different scale. So we'll start with principles-based approaches. I've presented to regulators. I've written white papers about how to regulate AI, which go to the regulators. And yeah, this I think is super important. I think government realizes they kind of missed the boat on social media, and they don't want to make the same mistake with AI. And we're there to help. Look, our mission is for people and companies to be able to use AI safely and securely, that above all else. And part of that is helping the regulators understand how to convince companies that that's a good idea. And because some of the things that I run into, as we talk to prospective clients, let's say we talk to chief compliance officers, lots of times they're like, gosh, I hope the regulators turn this into a rule because that's the only way I can get budget to do this, right? Which seems kind of crazy, but sometimes that's just the truth.
With any technology, there needs to be rules and frameworks that people can operate in so they know like what is good. And I'm glad that you brought up like the ethics of it too. I think we should probably dive into that later. But I guess I want to say that I think that there's probably a challenge for regulators because when social media came out, most people still didn't live their life online the way that we do now. But I think that we're seeing this explosion in generative AI adoption from every facet of people's lives, where students are using it up to governments, corporations, and healthcare, and every industry like wants to take advantage of generative AI. So I think that does present a challenge for regulators. So is there specific like compliance that you want to see happen that hasn't happened yet that you're fighting for or advocating for?
Yeah, I'd say one of the key things is really privacy, right? And I think that The Atlantic wrote an article a little while ago that was just after reading that, it just made my stomach sick, which was very private conversations that individuals were having with ChatGPT. One was, uh, and I'll paraphrase them a little bit. One was a man wondering if he was going to get divorced from his wife. Another one was a teenager really worried about body image, things like that, which I'm pretty confident that none of those people realize that their discussions with ChatGPT would literally end up in a national magazine,
Mm.
right? That is a now their names might not have appeared in there, but that's a pretty gross violation of privacy, if you ask me. And people are like, "Well, I don't think they're keeping my information or anything like that." I'm like, "That's wrong. Go to any of these AI tools you use and go back and look at your history a day later. If there's a history, that means they're storing it, right? Like everything's there. So number one, you got to be very cautious about that. And I think we could use some additional laws about privacy in the U.S. to be honest, right? And in addition, security, where I think that there have been some proposed rules that have not been passed about additional cybersecurity around financial companies and around Gen AI that just haven't happened yet. I think all it's going to take is one big bad attack or ransomware around AI, and the regulators and Congress will rush to pass rules. Don't be the company on the front page, right? Do this today. Get cybersecurity for AI today. Don't wait.
I think that's why it's so important that people who, like you, who have been in this industry for so long, are at those tables, at those discussions with regulators, like starting from now, because it's only going to get crazier from here. What is your personal view? I realize this is a little bit apart, but I'm just interested to hear what you have to say. What is your personal view about LLMs training on copyrighted material and then creating, we'll say, books or music or art?
Yeah, look, I think that there are a lot of ethical questions there. My older son's a professional musician, and he's pretty upset about this, to be honest. I mean, I think the copyright rules are pretty clear, and there are definitely people out there that believe some very large companies have violated all kinds of copyright rules and are suing, right? And these companies are being sued. The New York Times, for example, has a lawsuit going on right now. In terms of other things like music, like they're all in the same boat, right? It's copyrighted material that's being trained on. One of the issues is that it's really hard to determine if that happened, right? In other words, if I'm just a consumer of an AI music app or even ChatGPT or something like that, like how do I know if copyrighted material was used to create my answer, right? One you could try to suss that out by asking it to quote a book or something like that, but it's difficult to know, and I think that's part of the problem, and also part of the defense of the companies that have made these models. They're just sitting there going like, look, it's you can't get a copy of the book out of there. We just used it to trade. Maybe that's okay, right? Is that fair use? Certainly the copyright holders are arguing that it's not fair use.
Would you rather see this like regulated or litigated or both?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think it's probably less about regulation, like who the regulator be. That copyright laws are pretty straightforward. So I think it's just going to end up in the courts. It's probably going to end up in the Supreme Court, right? And if the answers come out in a way that new legislation is needed, then let's have new legislation. Sure.
The whole thing kind of reminds me of the RIAA lawsuits in the early 2000s. Do you remember that with like LimeWire and everything?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I just think that we are at a pivotal shift right now where, everything's changing and people don't really know like what is going to be the standard going forward, and it'll be very exciting to see like what 5 or 10 years brings. So, I want to ask you, what do you think 5 or 10 years is going to bring with generative AI?
Yeah, well, look, I think Gen AI and AI in general, the Bill Gates quote is technology changes less in a year than we think and more in 10 years, right? So I think it will be capable of like truly amazing things over even the next few years. And as we see autonomous agents start getting created that can do jobs like process a loan and things like that, it's going to be a game changer for industry. And the biggest kind of intermediate term risk for companies in terms of AI is not adopting it, because you will get absolutely run over by companies that are adopting it. And the same if you're an individual in the industry. If you're not an early adopter of AI, like 5 years from now, kind of you're risking your career, right? Because the people who are using AI are going to be vastly more efficient and better at their jobs. 10 years from now, I have an unusual prediction, which is that we're barely even going to be using large language models. And the answer is that we will come up with some even better AI technology at that point that starts to approach artificial general intelligence at some point, right? Like, I don't know when that's going to happen, or even in my lifetime if that's going to happen. Look, I'm very convinced we'll have something that looks like or sounds like or behaves like AGI in the next 10 years. It may not actually be AGI. And I should explain that for the listeners, right? So right now, large language models are basically statistical models. All they're really doing is predicting the next token or word in a sentence or paragraph or a paper, right? That's not thinking. And a great example of why that's important to understand is, you remember the story, the guy a year ago is like, I'm going to have ChatGPT write my legal brief, right? Which he then submitted to the court, and the opposing counsel is like, we can't find any of these cases, right? And which was true, and because ChatGPT had hallucinated and made up the cases, right? But here's the punchline that most people don't know. At the end of that, he was suspicious of those cases and said, ChatGPT, are you sure that's correct? And ChatGPT said yes. Now, if you understand how large language models work, which is predicting the next word and what's most likely, if you go on the internet and the phrase, are you sure that's right, comes up, what do you think the most common response is?
Yes.
Yes. So that's what ChatGPT was doing. It was not analyzing its responses and checking to make sure they were right or doing any kind of due diligence on it. It was just completing a sentence,
Wow.
right?
Like a
Yes.
bird, I guess.
Right. So it's just so you really have to understand how these work. And we may have some kind of truly thinking artificial intelligence in the future. It's probably going to evolve quantum computers and all kinds of complex stuff. And I don't honestly know what it's going to look like. It's probably not large language models.
But you think large language models might end up being the root of it, or at least somehow used with it?
Well, they're going to become way more advanced, right? That's for sure, right? Like as good as they are now, they will get better. They'll get faster. They will get less expensive to use. As people figure out how to compress them with other tools, they'll be chained together with other kinds of AI and something called composite AI, where you can have one AI telling a bunch of other AIs what to do. And you can imagine like how quickly that's going to be able to do very sophisticated things that right now we really believe only humans can do. The key there is like, honestly, our definition of artificial intelligence has just changed over time. Like it was the 1990s and IBM's Deep Blue chess computer beat Gary Kasparov, the current like reigning world champion in chess. And people are like, that's AI. Like it beat the chess champion. And then people realize, wait a second, all it's doing is brute force calculating, dozens of moves in the future. Like it's not thinking, it's calculating, right? And that's kind of what large language models are doing. They're not thinking, they're calculating. At some point, we'll get to the point where AI is thinking, not calculating, right? And that's kind of the next wave of AI, which honestly we haven't even started.
I think you brought up so many great points earlier. One of them was that people and companies should use AI for their jobs, because if they don't, they'll get left behind. But I think a lot of people are afraid of AI taking jobs. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, like how somebody who has never used AI before, who maybe wants to start using it to make themselves more productive in their job, how they can do that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that's a very common fear. So I interviewed my friend Dr. Kevin Lagrandeur on my podcast, AI Risk Reward, a few months ago. And he is one of the very few legit AI ethicists out there in the world. I'm sure there are people that call themselves that, but he's been doing it for a long time. And his concern is 10% plus unemployment within years, right? And that is not implausible. And that is an outcome that as a society we really have to work against, right? And we're going to have to trust that people like me and people at other big companies are really working to make sure that that doesn't happen, right? That being said, sticking your head in the sand and going, I'm not going to use AI because like AI might take my job is the wrong approach, right? The right approach in my mind is using AI to take the drudgery out of your job and take the parts of your job away that are repetitive and that you kind of don't like, and let you do the creative part of your job. Because if you can do that and become, the super user of AI to the point where you're 2 or 3 times more productive, you become one of the most valuable people at your company. And if you can then take that and help other people at your company learn how to do that, like imagine that company versus another company not doing that, right? It's pretty clear who the winner is going to be.
Yeah, for sure. I think that right now it's important for people to start learning and using AI, but at the same time, be careful about how much they rely on it, because it does make mistakes. And as you mentioned with that court case, sometimes the mistakes are pretty embarrassing, or they could be even catastrophic. So I guess, like, well, hold on. Before I get into the question, did you see, I think it was on Twitter a while ago, there was this post that had gone kind of viral ish, talking about how somebody had had a phone call with a client, and like in their business. And then they had an AI transcribing the call. And then the call bled into a VC call after that. and then the AI sent all of those very private, that conversation to the client that was not supposed to leave
Oh
the
yeah.
company. Yeah, so I guess let's jump into that. Do you want to talk about best practices for using an AI but also protecting your business?
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. Yeah, one of the things we do when dealing with, like, say, Zoom calls and team calls and things like that is really only allow the owner of the meeting to transcribe it, right? So that's a best practice for sure, right? And I think that kind of governance around what data people can use and who can do what is super important. That's literally the foundation of the software that we've written. Other best practices I think are, especially in the work world, kind of walk before you run, right? Like, roll out pretty straightforward, easy to understand and use stuff like, hey, this will help you reply to emails using AI and things like that. Don't go right to, use case number 227, approve a loan automatically on a house, right? Like, start with the easy stuff first, where the risk is lower, right? Also, along those lines, start internally before you do AI externally. You've heard about the Chevy dealership that sold the car for $1 earlier this year, right? Because their
I didn't
chatbot,
hear that.
yeah, there's a chatbot online that sold somebody a car for $1, right? So it's like, okay, that's a violation of the do it internally first before externally, right? Like, don't just throw a chatbot out there for all your clients to use, because if it makes mistakes, it's just becomes not just a problem for your company, but also a PR disaster, right? Like, so you got to be careful about that. And there's a whole bunch of other principles in terms of testing and use cases and things like that that I won't go into. But if anybody's interested, feel free to reach out.
Actually, so how do people reach out to you? Like you, as I said before, like you have many different solutions for different people, you know, K through 12 educators to small businesses to enterprise to governments. Like, if somebody wants to talk with you about how you can help them with what they're doing or their business, like how should they reach out to you?
Yeah. So first of all, we don't do stuff for individuals, only businesses and government entities, to be clear. You can email me at aleccrawford@aicrisk.com, or you can just go to aicrisk.com and sign up for our newsletter, ask for a demo, a free demo. Happy to do it. And yeah, thanks.
So, like before I let you go, because we have another 2 minutes, and I definitely want to. I mean, this has been an amazing conversation. What kind of things do you talk about on your podcast?
All kinds of stuff. So the AI Risk Reward podcast really talks about the risks and rewards for using AI in different industries or businesses. We talk to cybersecurity experts. We talk to users and founders of new AI companies. Yeah, it's pretty fun. And then separately, I've got the Stay Sustainable podcast, which also discusses topics about that include AI occasionally, in terms of things like sustainability of AI and how much energy AI is using and things like that. But yeah, there's for those that know who Chris Roberts is, he's a pretty famous cybersecurity guy, and there's a hilarious episode with him jumping out of planes and talking about Teslas on autopilot driving through shootouts in LA and things like that. So that's a fun one if you're driving somewhere for the holidays.
So, Alec, thank you so much for joining me again. I just want to mention Alec's website, aicrisk.com. Check it out and also check out his podcast. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Alec. Do you have any parting words for the audience?
No, it's just been great to be on the show, and just wishing everybody a great holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you.